My therapist once told me that the moments that change your life rarely announce themselves. She said they slip in through a back door disguised as something small, something embarrassing, something you'd give anything to take back in the first 5 seconds. She wasn't wrong, and if she ever asks me for an example, I know exactly which Tuesday night I'll describe. It started with a smoke alarm and a bag of microwaved popcorn. That's the part nobody warns you about when it comes to falling for someone. It's never moonlight and eye contact. It's burnt popcorn at 11:47 at night, a towel waving at a ceiling sensor, and you standing in a hallway in a t-shirt you definitely should have thrown out 2 years ago, watching your roommate lose an argument with a kitchen appliance. His name was Colson, actually, which he hated with a special kind of hatred reserved for things that embarrass you in front of authority figures. Only my mom calls me Colson, he'd said the day we met, and only when I've done something she's about to make me regret. I'd filed that information somewhere in the back of my head without knowing why. We'd been living together for 6 weeks when the popcorn incident happened. 6 weeks of splitting electricity bills and debating whether the dishes in the sink were mine or his. 6 weeks of learning that he slept with a fan on even in October. 6 weeks of pretending I didn't notice things I absolutely noticed. I wasn't supposed to notice. That was the deal I'd made with myself before I even moved in. I'd been down that road before: the roommate situation, the inconvenient feelings, the slow and very thorough humiliation that followed. I was 23, finishing my last year of my master's program, and I had genuinely decided that I was done making my life complicated in that particular direction. Cole had introduced himself as straight in the most accidental way possible, not like he announced it. More like, the second week we lived together, he'd come home visibly upset, sat on the couch with this hollow look, and when I asked what happened, he'd said, "The girl I've been seeing for 4 months just told me she needs space." He said it the way you say something out loud to make it real. I'd handed him a beer and sat with him through 2 episodes of some nature documentary neither of us was watching. That was it. That was all. But somewhere in that moment, a door in my head quietly closed. So by week 6, I had a system. I was friendly, I was normal, I was his roommate who occasionally stole his cereal and left the bathroom light on, nothing more than that. And then the smoke alarm went off at 11:47 at night, and my system started developing cracks. I came out of my room because the sound was obnoxious and close. I found Cole in the kitchen standing on a chair, waving a dish towel at the ceiling with this furious concentration, like he was personally offended by the alarm's existence. There was a bag of popcorn on the counter that had clearly gone catastrophically wrong. The kitchen smelled like burnt rubber and sadness. "I had it handled," he said without looking at me. "You're standing on a chair. I'm vertically managing the situation." I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing, crossed the kitchen, and took the towel from him. He stepped down from the chair. I waved the towel at the sensor for about 30 seconds until it clicked off, and then we were standing there in a suddenly very quiet kitchen with burnt popcorn between us. "It was supposed to be a late snack," he said. "What happened to it?" "I forgot it was in there." He looked at the bag. "I was reading something." "What were you reading?" He picked up the bag, looked at it like it had personally betrayed him. "Doesn't matter." That was Cole's thing. He had this habit of starting to say something and then pulling back, not in a mysterious way, not in a dramatic way, but in the way of someone who genuinely wasn't sure if the rest of the sentence was worth anyone's time. It used to be just a personality quirk to me. By week 6, I'd started noticing it more than I should have. I went back to my room, he went back to his house, and I sat at my desk and stared at the document I was supposed to be writing and thought about nothing in particular, or so I told myself. 3 nights after the popcorn incident, I knocked on his door because I needed to ask if he'd seen my charger. This was normal. This was a completely normal and legitimate reason to knock on a person's door. He said, "It's open." I pushed the door. He was on the floor, not sitting like properly on the floor, back against his bed, knees up with his laptop balanced on them. There were papers spread around him in a radius that suggested either deep thought or an organizational system I didn't understand. He had headphones around his neck and he was wearing that gray long sleeve he always wore when he was doing something he actually cared about. I knew this because I'd noticed it, which was fine. Noticing things was fine. "Have you seen my charger, the USB-C one?" He pointed without looking up to the power strip by his desk. My charger was plugged into it. "Oh," I crossed the room, crouched down to unplug it. "Sorry, I didn't know it was here. I borrowed it last week, forgot to tell you." "It's fine." I should have left. I had my charger. There was no remaining logistical reason to stay in the room. But I must have paused because Cole looked up from whatever he was reading and said, "What?" "Nothing, I gestured vaguely at the papers. "What's all this?" He looked at it like he was deciding something, application stuff. "For what?" Another pause, "That pullback thing. Then, there's a residency program, architecture, in Lisbon." He said it quickly like he was hoping I wouldn't catch it. "It's a long shot. I'm probably not even going to submit it." "Why not?" He shrugged. He picked up one of the papers, looked at it and set it down. "I don't know, it's a lot of things, the timing, my job here, just a lot of reasons." "That's a lot of reasons to not do something you clearly care about." He looked at me then, not in a charged way, not in the way people look at each other in movies when the music swells. Just looked, like I'd said something that landed somewhere and he wasn't sure how to respond to it. "Yeah," he said finally. I said goodnight and went back to my room. I did not sleep for a very long time. Here's the thing about living with someone. You learn them in pieces. You don't mean to, it's just you share a refrigerator and you notice what they consistently buy and what they forget. You share a living room and you learn what they reach for when they're tired versus when they're wired. You learn the difference between the shower running at 7 a.m. because it's a normal day and the shower running at midnight because something happened that they're not talking about. The shower ran at midnight. That had happened twice in the 6 weeks since we moved in. I'm not saying I kept track. I'm saying I knew the pattern. The second time it happened was a Thursday. I'd been up late finishing a chapter draft and I heard the water start around 12:30 and something about it sat differently this time. It wasn't anxiety exactly. It was something closer to wanting to be useful and having no idea how to do that. When he came out, I was in the kitchen making tea. He appeared in the hallway in a t-shirt and shorts with his hair wet and kind of looked surprised to see light on. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he stood there for a second. "Tea at midnight." "It's actually 12:40. Even worse." He came and sat on the counter, which was a thing he did, sat on the counter instead of pulling out a chair, like a casual act of mild structural disrespect. I handed him a mug because I'd made two without deciding to. He wrapped both hands around it and didn't say anything for a while. "You don't have to tell me," I said. "I know." Another silence, the kind that has texture. "I called my brother tonight," Cole said eventually. "We don't really talk, there's stuff there, old stuff." He was looking at the mug. "I don't know why I called, I think I wanted to feel like someone knew me before all the current versions of me existed." He paused. "That probably sounds weird." "It sounds like wanting to be seen by someone who's known you long enough to have context." He looked at me over the mug. "Yeah, that." We stayed in the kitchen until almost 2. We talked about his brother and then about my sister, and then somehow about whether cities have personalities or whether people just project personalities onto cities, which was one of the stranger conversational pivots I'd experienced at that hour. And the whole time there was nothing happening. There was literally nothing happening except two people sitting in a kitchen drinking tea. And yet when I went back to my room, something about the night felt like it had weight. I made myself go to sleep before I could do anything stupid with that weight. I like to think about it. Week 7 was when things started getting complicated. Not dramatically complicated, just the kind of complicated where you start catching yourself noticing a shift and then immediately arguing with yourself about whether the shift is real or manufactured. He started coming into my room to ask questions that didn't strictly require in-person delivery. "Did you eat yet?" Doesn't require standing in a doorway. "What are you working on?" Doesn't require pulling my desk chair around and sitting in it. These were things that could have been texts. They were not texts. I filed this information under things I am not going to do anything with. I also started finishing work earlier than I needed to, which was new. I had never in my graduate career finished work earlier than I needed to. Suddenly I was wrapping up by 9:30 and drifting toward the common areas without examining why. Cole started a habit of making food late and always making too much. "I overestimated the portion," he'd say, like this wasn't a pattern. It became a kind of joke between us, except for how it also became the reason we ate dinner together almost every night for 2 weeks. Then one night he made pasta and we ate it on the living room floor because the table was covered in his architecture stuff and we didn't move it. And halfway through the meal he started laughing at something I said, not a polite laugh, the real kind, the kind that comes out before the person decides if it should, and I looked at him and thought with a clarity that was almost clinical, I'm in trouble. I finished my pasta. I did not acknowledge the thought. I went to bed at a completely normal time and lay in the dark and had a calm, rational internal conversation with myself about how this was manageable, and how nothing was happening, and how I had a plan, and how the plan was working, and how I was fine. I was not fine. The night I walked into his room, the actual night the story is about, I want to be precise about how normal it started. It was a Saturday. I'd spent most of it at the library working through a methodology section that was resisting all my efforts to make it coherent. I'd come home tired, a little dim behind the eyes, the kind of mental fatigue that isn't dramatic but makes everything feel slightly far away. Cole's car was in the lot, so I knew he was home, but the apartment was quiet when I got in, which wasn't unusual. I made food. I sat with it at the table. I opened my laptop to do something and then closed it because I didn't have it in me. I flipped through my phone. I thought about calling my friend Devin, who'd been asking for weeks when we were going to actually hang out and not just talk about hanging out. I put the phone down. Around 9, I noticed his light was on under the door. I had a legitimate question to ask him. This is important to me. I wanted on record that there was a legitimate question. I needed to know if he was going to be home the following weekend because the building was doing elevator maintenance, and if we both needed to go out at certain times, it mattered logistically. This was a completely functional adult roommate query. I knocked once. He said, "Yeah, come in." I opened the door. He was sitting at his desk with his back to me, sketching something. His desk lamp was on and the rest of the room was dim, and he had music coming from his phone at a low volume, something that wasn't in a genre I could immediately identify. He turned when I came in and then turned back, which I interpreted as continuing talking. I'm in the middle of something, which was normal. "Hey," I said, "I just wanted to ask about next weekend." "Hold on," he said, "1 second." I waited. He was sketching with this focused energy, the kind you don't interrupt. I'd seen it before when he got into something, this total absorption. I'd always found it kind of anyway. I looked around the room while I waited. The Lisbon application materials were still there, slightly reorganized now. There were more pages. He'd been working on it. He hadn't mentioned submitting it. I didn't bring it up. There was a photograph pinned to the wall above his desk that I'd never paid attention to before. 3 people at what looked like a rooftop somewhere, laughing. He was in it, younger, different haircut, and there was a guy next to him with an arm around his shoulder, and they were mid-laugh at the same thing. It was the kind of photograph that captures a specific kind of ease. I wondered who the people were. "Okay," he said and turned. "Sorry, what were you asking?" I asked the elevator maintenance question. He thought about it. "I think I'll be around. Why?" I explained the logistics. He nodded, and then, instead of that being the end of the conversation, he said, "What are you doing right now?" "Nothing." "Pull up that chair." I pulled up the chair. He turned his sketchbook around to show me what he'd been working on. It was a building, or the idea of a building, something with angles that didn't follow a conventional logic. "This is what I submitted to Lisbon," he said. I looked up at him. "You submitted it?" "Yesterday." He looked at the sketch. I felt stupid not to. "That's cool, that's great. It's probably nothing. Stop doing that." He blinked. "Doing what?" "The thing where you start a sentence about something good and then immediately close it off." I didn't know I was going to say it until I did. "You do it constantly, it's annoying." He stared at me. For a second I thought I'd misread the room entirely, and this was going to be one of those moments where you say a true thing at the wrong time and it lands badly. But then he made this sound, not quite a laugh, something adjacent, and said, "My mom says the same thing." "Your mom sounds smart. Don't tell her that, she'll be insufferable." We both looked at the sketch for a moment. The building he'd designed was strange in a good way, like it had been designed around a question instead of an answer. "What's the concept?" I asked. He explained it. He talked for about 15 minutes, which I don't think he realized. He talked about negative space and the way light moves through buildings differently depending on whether it's invited or incidental. He talked about a courtyard he'd seen in a photograph of Lisbon, where 3 walls met at an angle that shouldn't have worked geometrically, but created this effect where the light pooled at a specific hour like something held in cupped hands. He talked about wanting to make something that felt like a conversation rather than a statement. I listened. This is the part that, looking back, I think was the real moment, not what came after. This. Because I realized sitting there that I could listen to him talk about architecture for the rest of my life without once wishing he'd stop. And that wasn't something I could uncategorize as casual or friendly or practical. That was something else entirely. He stopped talking and kind of shook his head like he was returning to himself. Sorry, that was probably too much. It wasn't. You're just being polite. I'm not polite, I said, ask anyone. He smiled at that, and then something changed in the room, which is the only way I know how to describe it. Nothing moved. The light didn't shift. His phone was still playing that low, unidentifiable music, but something in the air rearranged itself and we both felt it and neither of us said anything about it. He looked at me for a second too long. I looked back. Okay, he said in a voice that had a small crack in it. This is going to sound like a weird thing to say. Okay. He stopped. He looked at the desk. He was doing the thing, the pull-back thing, except this time he seemed to catch himself doing it and he almost laughed at himself for it, and then he looked back at me and said, more directly than I'd ever heard him say anything, I've been trying to figure out how to be around you without wanting things I don't know how to want. The room was very quiet. I didn't move. He wasn't looking away, which was new. He was holding eye contact in a way that felt like it cost him something, and I could see the cost on his face, the slight tension around his jaw, the way he was breathing a little carefully. Cole, I said. I know, he said. I know what I said about, I know what you probably think, about me, about what I am. What do you think I think? He exhaled, that I'm straight, which is what I thought too for a really long time. I don't have a word for what I am, actually. I don't know if I need one. He looked at his hands. I just know that since the first week we lived together, I've been thinking about you in ways that don't feel like roommate ways, and I've been telling myself it's something else, but tonight you said that thing about me closing off sentences and it was such a small thing, but, he stopped. I don't know, it's just, I don't know. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a very concrete way. I'm gay, I said, because it felt like the right thing to put on the table clearly without dressing it up. That's not new, that's just what I am. I know. And I have been, yes, in your direction for a while, which I was handling. He made a small sound. Is that what that was? What did you think it was? I thought maybe I was reading into it because I wanted to be. We sat with that for a second. So I said slowly, where does that leave us? He looked at me, honest, unguarded, and a little scared in the way that isn't weakness, the way that's actually just being real. I don't know, he said, but I think I'm done pretending I don't feel it. The thing is, I'd imagined some version of a moment like this. Not specifically, not this room, not this conversation, not the low music and the sketch of a building with light pooling in its courtyard, but the general shape of it. And in every version I'd imagined, I'd known exactly what to say, something clean and reassuring, something that made it easy. What I actually said was, I'm scared too, for the record. He looked at me like that was the right answer. Okay, he said. Okay, I said back. Neither of us moved for a moment, then he shifted his chair slightly. I shifted mine, and we were a little closer without having done anything decisive about it, which felt exactly right for where we were. Nothing happened that night. I want to be clear about that, not because I'm being coy about it, but because nothing that happened was its own kind of everything. We talked until almost 3 in the morning. We talked about his brother and my sister and the architecture of cities and the way Lisbon looks in photographs, and what it means to want a life that feels like yours. At some point his phone died and we didn't notice until the music stopped, and neither of us reached to plug it in. At some point he said, can I ask you something? Yeah. That first night when I told you about the girl I was seeing, what went through your head? I thought about it, honestly, something like that's the door closing, that's the signal. And you just accept that. I thought it was the information I'd been given. He was quiet, then, I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was telling you, I wasn't trying to close the door. I know that now. I don't know what I was doing then, honestly, I think I was trying to process something out loud without knowing what it was. He paused. That sounds like an excuse. It sounds like a person figuring things out. He looked at me, you're very patient. I am absolutely not patient, I said. I have been internally catastrophizing for 7 weeks. He laughed, the real one again, the one that comes out before he decides it should, and something settled in the room like a joint clicking into place after being slightly wrong for too long. I went to my room around 3:15. I stood in the dark for a minute before turning on the light. I had the specific feeling of something having shifted in a way you can't shift back, and I wasn't sure yet if that was frightening or just true. Both, probably, both at the same time. The following days were quiet in a way that was full of things. He texted me once from across the apartment, a meme about bad architectural decisions, which was not new, except for how it landed differently now that everything was slightly different. I texted back and then sat with my phone and thought about the texture of the last several weeks, about how many small moments had been building up to a Tuesday night conversation I hadn't seen coming. He knocked on my door on Monday evening. I said, "Come in." He was holding two mugs which had become a kind of language between us, and he set one on my desk and said, "There's an open gallery thing downtown this week. Architecture student work, some of it from the Lisbon program." He was looking at the mug. "I was going to go Thursday if you want to." "Yeah," I said, "I want to." He nodded, started to leave. "Cold." He stopped in the doorway. "I'm glad I knocked on your door for my charger." He thought about it. "Your charger was in my room for a week." "I know." "You didn't say anything." "I know." He looked at me with something in his face that was warm and a little amused and a little something else that I was only just learning to read. "Good night," he said. "Good night." Thursday came. The gallery was in a converted warehouse space on the east side of the city, the kind of place with exposed brick that people either love or perform loving. And the work was good, genuinely good, in ways that surprised me even though I don't know a lot about architecture, except what I've absorbed by osmosis over the last 7 weeks of living with someone who thinks about it constantly. Cole moved through the space the way he talked about buildings, carefully, with attention to things other people walked past. He stopped in front of a model of a building with a glass atrium and spent almost 4 minutes looking at it, and I stood next to him and let him look. "The light calculation is wrong," he said eventually. "Is it?" "The angle of the glass would create a glare problem at midday in the summer. It's visually striking, but it hasn't been thought through." He paused. "That's maybe a harsh thing to say about someone's work. You're not saying it to them." "True." We kept moving. Near the end of the gallery there was a small piece, not a model but a drawing, hand-rendered, of a courtyard at a particular angle. 3 walls meeting, light pooling. Cole stopped. "That's Lisbon," he said. It was, same photograph he'd described, maybe, or the same image interpreted through someone else's hand. The light in the drawing was precise and deliberate. Someone had thought very hard about where it fell. He stood there for a long time. I stood next to him. "If you get in," I said, "and you go, I want to hear everything." He turned to look at me. "Yeah. Yeah, I meant it completely. I want to know what the light actually does in that courtyard. I want to know if it's what you imagined." He looked at the drawing for another moment, then back at me. "What if I don't get in? Then you design it anyway, somewhere else, and it's still yours." The gallery was busy around us, people moving, voices overlapping. But he was looking at me with that direct, unguarded look I was starting to think of as his real face, the one under the careful one, and he said quietly, "I don't think I've ever had someone talk about my work like you do." I didn't know what to do with that except accept it. "You should have found better people sooner." He smiled, and then carefully, in a way that was asking without asking, he shifted his hand so his fingers were close to mine. Not touching, close. I closed the distance. He held on. We stood in front of a drawing of a Lisbon courtyard, holding hands like it was something we'd been doing for years, and neither of us said anything. Because some things don't need commentary. Some things are just true, and you stand inside them and you let them be true. A month later, he got into the residency. He came out of his room holding his phone with this look on his face, not the one you'd expect, not pure joy, but something more complicated. The look of someone whose reality has just rearranged itself in a way they'd wanted and is now genuinely reckoning with what that means. I'd been making coffee. I turned and saw his face and put the mug down. "You got in," I said. He nodded. "Cold." "Yeah," he sat down on the kitchen counter. "Old habit. Yeah, I got in." "How long is it?" 8 months. We'd been not defined, not labeled, but real for about 6 weeks by then. 6 weeks of dinners and gallery visits and late-night conversations, and one evening on the roof of the building that felt like it had been lifted out of ordinary time and set somewhere separate. 8 months was not a small thing. "Okay," I said. "I haven't decided anything," he said quickly. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, I'm just saying okay. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means I want you to go. I poured the coffee, set a mug on the counter next to him, automatic. It means I want you to go stand in that courtyard and watch the light do what you spent months imagining it would do. And I want you to design something that asks a question instead of answers one. I looked at him. And I want you to come back, but that's a separate thing and we can figure that out. He was quiet for a moment. You're doing the thing again, I said. What thing? The closing off thing, where you go very still when something feels like too much. He exhaled, set the phone down. I'm not closing off. Good. He stopped. I tried again. I wasn't expecting this, any of this, not the program and not you. 6 months ago, I would not have predicted any of this as the shape of my life. Does it feel wrong? No, he said immediately without the pause. That's the thing, it doesn't feel wrong at all. I picked up my coffee. He picked up his. We stood in the kitchen that had been the site of a smoke alarm and a burned bag of popcorn and 2 cups of tea at midnight and approximately 100 small unremarkable moments that had become, in retrospect, the architecture of something real. 8 months, I said. 8 months, he said back. We can do it in 8 months. He looked at me with that real face, the unguarded one. Yeah. Yeah, I meant it. We've survived worse things than distance. I paused. Also, you're going to send me photographs of every building you see. That's a lot of photographs. I'm aware. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, in a voice that was quiet and sure, I'm going to think about you in every courtyard I ever stand in. I didn't have anything clever to say to that. Sometimes a thing is just true and beautiful and you don't need to be clever about it. Go to Lisbon, I said, make something that holds light. He nodded. Outside, the morning was doing its normal thing, traffic, birds, the building settling into the day. Inside, we stood in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and everything that had happened since one Tuesday night when a smoke alarm went off and a door I'd thought was closed turned out to be a window, and it turned out I just needed to find the right one to climb through. He left for Lisbon on a Thursday morning in November when it was cold enough that you could see breath. I didn't go to the airport. We'd agreed that wasn't us, the big teary departure thing, not yet. What we were was 2 people who knew how to sit in a kitchen at midnight, who knew how to stand in front of a drawing and understand it was important without being told, who knew how to find each other through a wall and a closed door and 6 weeks of careful distance, and one night when neither of us went to sleep until 3 in the morning. He texted me from the gate. A photograph, just one, his carry-on and his sketchbook and his coffee from above on a plastic airport chair, no caption. I saved it. 2 weeks later, I got a different photograph. A courtyard, 3 walls meeting, light pooling in the corner like something held in cupped hands. Underneath it, he'd typed one line. You were right about the light. I looked at it for a long time. Then I typed back, I know. And I sat with it, the weight of it, the warmth of it, the specific and peculiar beauty of falling for someone through burned popcorn and borrowed chargers and drawings of buildings in cities you've never visited. Through midnight kitchens and honest conversations and the slow, imperfect, completely unplanned process of 2 people learning they were both, without knowing it, looking for the same window. I don't know what will happen next. That's the honest answer. I don't know how 8 months goes or what we are when it's over or what shape the future takes when you're figuring it out in real time alongside someone who is also figuring it out in real time. What I know is this. Some nights are just late enough and quiet enough and strange enough that something real gets through. Some people come into your life through the most routine of doors, a lease agreement, a shared utility bill, a smoke alarm at 11:47, and they change the temperature of the whole room without announcing it. And some moments that feel like wrong turns are actually the path. I walked into my roommate's room at the wrong time. Or maybe I walked in exactly when I was supposed to. I keep thinking it's the second one.